night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Good evening, good morning, and welcome. It's Beyond Reality Radio. I'm your host, J.V. Johnson. Jason has the night off. We've got a two-guest program for you tonight. In the first hour, we're going to be bringing in Dylan Avery. Dylan is a documentary filmmaker. He's kind of created an internet sensation with his first documentary called Loose Change 9/11, and it was a piece of work that really set off a firestorm of conspiracy talk over the 9/11 attacks. He gained a reputation as a very serious filmmaker from that particular work that became viral on YouTube. He followed it up with a film called Black and Blue, and another one called A Field Full of Secrets. And he's got a new one out. I'm not even sure if it's out yet, called Magic Molecule. And we're going to be talking about all of that with Dylan in the first hour of the program. And then in the second hour of the program, Lee Austin, who is a returning guest to Beyond Reality Radio. He's been on before talking about his book, Morning Star's Tale, which also relates to flat Earth theory. And he has a new article out that's causing quite a stir in the flat Earth community that presents a side of this discussion that may or may not have been discussed before. And he'll be on in the second hour of the show to talk about that. Of course, we'll take your phone calls during that second hour as well. Hey, I don't know if you can notice this whole weekend thing that I had the fundraiser and played in all the bands, did all the singing and the screaming and the staying up too lating and all that stuff. My voice is still just gone. Thankfully, it's Wednesday. Tomorrow night is the last live show of the week, because Friday we do a best of. And we'll be bringing Lee Harris into the program. Lee is an energy healer. He'll give practical guidance, inspiration, and a clear blueprint for growth and change, including how to invoke the help of our spirit guides and angels. That's information that everybody can use at some point or another. So you can see we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. I want you to check out Scaricon.com if you're a fan of horror, sci-fi, or paranormal entertainment, television, or movies. Go check out that website, Scaricon.com. It's an event that's coming up June 7th through the 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts, just out of Boston, at the Sheraton Hotel there. It's going to be a great weekend of a lot of fun. Because we have two guests, we're going to get right into it here. So I'm going to take a break. We'll come back and bring Dylan Avery, and he'll be our first guest tonight. We'll talk about his documentary films, including Loose Change, Black and Blue, and the new one, Magic Molecule. That's all ahead. Hey, it's JV here. You know I've asked for your support in the past, and I'm going to do it again because it's really, really important. And there are a couple of ways you can support the show, and it's so inexpensive. Now, you can go to Patreon, and you can become a Patreon supporter, and we really, really encourage that. But there's also another way. If you look at the description of the podcast, if you're a podcast listener, and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a way to support the show directly through the podcast app. And it's only 99 cents a month. It's less than $1. You probably have that change in your couch right now. That $1 a month, less than $1, goes a long way in helping us produce this program, provide great interviews for you during the course of the week. I thank you in advance because the support is so important to the program. Great show lined up for you tonight. I'll remind you the phone number is 844-687-7669 when we open up the phone lines for your calls, comments, questions. We look forward to that part of the program always. We have two guests on tonight. Later in the program, Lee Austin will join us to talk about a new idea that he has in relationship to the theory that the Earth is actually not a sphere spinning through space. It's actually flat, part of an enclosed system. There are other parts to that theory that vary from person to person, but Lee has an idea that he wants to discuss with us. He's written an article about it, and we'll bring him in the second hour of the show. The first hour of tonight's program, we've got Dylan Avery joining us. Dylan is a documentary filmmaker. His website is IamDylanAvery.com. His films include Loose Change, Black and Blue, and he's got a new one that's out called Magic Molecule. And Dylan, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. It's an honor, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
All right, so the first thing I need to get out of the way is I just found out from my assistant producer, Orion, that you are actually someone who grew up in my hometown of Oneonta, New York.
Yes, sir.
That's pretty exciting stuff. I don't usually get a fellow Oneontan on this program, so that's kind of neat. How long were you there? I mean, was it your whole childhood or what?
Pretty much. I was born in Leesburg, Virginia, and then we moved to Franklin when I was about 3 or 4. Spent a little bit of time in Franklin, and then when I was in 6th grade, we moved to Oneonta. I stayed there until I was 19 or 20, and then moved down to D.C. for a couple years, moved back to New York, and then in 2008, I moved to L.A. So I spent a good chunk of my life in upstate New York. There was a time when I would have said most, but I've now been in California for 10 years, so it kind of throws off that math a little bit.
So as we get into talking about your career here, how much of any of your work can you source back to your days in Oneonta? Not as far as subject matter per se, but just maybe influence.
Influence? I'm not so sure about that. I mean, thing I can say. Well, I mean, the one thing I can say is that, since you bring up Loose Change, there was a point when, it was pretty popular. We were getting a lot of press, and we were we were working with KPFK for a lot of their fund drives. We actually kind of helped save the radio station at one point. But basically, we were having a long debate about whether we should move out to Los Angeles. Not even whether we should, but rather that we should move out to Los Angeles. And we were talking about packing up a trailer and where we could move to and all this. And then, Corey, my best friend and kind of partner in the Loose Change thing, he had just gotten out of the Army, so he went back to Oneonta just to kind of make a trip back home. And while he was up there, he was like driving on a back road, and he called me. He's like, man, instead of like moving all the way out to LA where nobody really knows us, and there's really no guarantee that anything's going to happen, what if we move back to New York for a bit? And I was I don't want to say I was over DC, but I was ready for a change of scenery at that point. And the change of scenery, I didn't expect it to be Oneonta, but there was an advantage of moving back there where. There's probably a school of thought that we wouldn't have gotten the media snowball that we did because Cindy Sheehan came to speak at SUCO, our local state college. She went to speak there.
My alma mater. It's my alma mater, actually. Yeah,
exactly. She went there to speak about the death of her son, Casey. She's Cindy Sheehan. She is the famous anti-war mom.
That's right.
If you paid attention at all during the Iraq War, you heard about her. So she was kind of doing a speaking tour. She came to SUCO, and we had actually just made up our brand new Investigate 9/11 shirts. We had burnt DVD copies of the second edition of Loose Change that we were just putting the finishing touches on. And then so Cindy spoke, and then actually before she spoke, we had noticed that there was a reporter across the room from WICZ, which was the Fox affiliate out of Binghamton. We actually kind of recognized him. We're like, oh my God, is that Doug Kolk from TV? We should go over there and talk to him. And so it's really kind of a funny moment, and part of it is captured on camera, where we're like, all right, we had like a football huddle, and we're like, all right, we're going to go over there, and we're going to say this, and we're going to do that, and we'll give him a copy of the movie. So Corey stays there to man the camera. And Jason and I start walking over to Doug. And as that happens, Doug actually starts walking over to us. And we actually kind of meet in the middle of the auditorium. And he's like, can I interview you guys about your shirts? So we did. We went over. We did an interview. I spoke. Jason spoke. Corey spoke. And when the Cindy Sheehan piece aired, we were like, there's no way. I mean, he's not going to put us in there. There's no reason for it. And so it aired, and we weren't there. And we were like, all right, well, that kind of figures. And then Doug called me, like, probably a couple minutes after the show aired, and he was like, hey, guys, I know that, you weren't on tonight, and that's because I've decided that I'm going to give you guys your own segment. We were just, like, blown away at this point. Like, we're just starting to wrap up the second edition. We're, like, contemplating the what ifs of what happens when this movie gets released and just what it means for people to be talking about it. And here we have a reporter calling us up, not only telling us he's going to do a segment about the film, but asking us advice on what he should put in the segment. I was like, oh, well, you should probably mention Building 7 over here, and you should mention this over there. And before we knew it, like 2-3 nights later, we had a special dedicated to us airing on WICZ Fox 40. And then it actually got so popular on the web forums, and it started getting passed around from website to website. And then eventually a bunch of websites in Germany started posting it. And then basically the story got so much traffic that it crashed their website. And actually they had to do a third follow-up piece on how the story broke their website and how it crashed their servers. So there is something to be said that if we had moved to LA instead of Oneonta, that we wouldn't have gotten that huge push that we got that really helped kind of launch us into the stratosphere.
So what came first for you? Were you questioning the official account of events that occurred on 9/11 first? Were you a filmmaker first? Or did all of it come together with an aha moment at some point?
I guess I always had my subconscious doubts about it. Nothing too black or white, nothing too definitive, but because I just obviously didn't have any information at that time, but there was just something about it that felt off, I suppose. I know that sounds really like airy-fairy and just kind of like not really conclusive, but it just our government's response to the attacks or the lack thereof, the fact that the attack even happened. It was just kind of those basic questions that a lot of people were asking that I think what kind of were motivating me at the time. So I think that was really kind of the general consensus shortly after 9/11 and for a while afterwards is like, how exactly did this happen and how can we prevent it from happening again? And then the more you looked into it, and when the military started releasing different timelines of when they had scrambled their jets, where they had scrambled them from, you had suspicious things like them trying to appoint Henry Kissinger as head of the 9/11 Commission. Very shady things started happening. And so, it was right on that same time I was trying to develop a script. I had participated in the first Project Greenlight, which I think was like 98 or 99. Before that, I had edited my first music video at like age 13, 14. So growing up, I aspired to be a programmer and I wanted to make video games. And then at some point, the tide just kind of turned and I started focusing more on film.
So you started I'm sorry. So you had an idea that you wanted to make films. You were questioning. I just want to make sure we get this in before the break here. And you were started to question the official account of events on 9/11. But at what point did you decide to turn this into a documentary film?
That's a long answer that we'll probably have to wait until after the break. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that it was supposed to be a narrative feature film, and then I realized that the film that I wanted to make was just not feasible for an 18-year-old with no budget and not really a lot of resources, and only his friends as actors.
Yeah,
so it was a logistical decision.
Yeah, but and then I read somewhere that you started with a few $1,000s and a compact Presario computer, which many people don't even know what that is anymore because compact's gone.
Yeah.
But is that true?
Basically, and I mean, the couple $1,000s included the cost of the laptop. So the laptop was about $1,000, $1,300, something like that, and then a whole bunch of 9/11 commemorative DVDs and news DVDs and anything I could take footage from, and that was basically the dollar cost of it: a laptop and footage, and and then while I was living in DC, my roommate a DJ moved in from LA who turned out, became my roommate, and that was DJ Schooley. Because before he had moved in, I was kind of using a crappy Walmart mic, and I was just kind of using Beastie Boys instrumental tracks and different stuff because I didn't know anyone that made music really, not anything that fit what I was trying to use. So
right.
It was pretty fortuitous that my new roommate happened to not only be a DJ with a really nice microphone that allowed me to record voiceovers with it, but also a guy who makes some really cool beats. And that was really when things kind of came together.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes here. So you put this film together basically on a shoestring budget on a rather simple consumer-grade laptop computer. And did you have an intention to try to find some theatrical release or something, or was it always intended to be an internet film?
I did in my ignorance try to call a couple theaters and talk about what it would mean to actually get it played properly in theaters. I did, however, while I lived in DC on September 11, 2004, the 3-year anniversary, I did have a screening at Vision Cinema, which is unfortunately no longer in business. But it was this really awesome independent theater just outside DuPont Circle, which is kind of like northwest DC. But it did actually show in a theater at one point, not including all the countless other times that it's been screened at like festivals and events and things like that. But it did screen on the 3rd anniversary in Vision Cinema in DC. But, apart from that, I submitted it to Cannes. I submitted it to a couple of festivals.
When the film was finally released and people started to see it with some regularity, what was the reaction that you got right away? Did you get some hate mail?
In the beginning, it was really, I don't want to say kind of in for it, but a lot of the first edition, a lot of people that were watching it were already kind of on board.
Right.
It was pretty popular in the Let's Roll 911 forums. It was popular on a couple of sites. So it was really, I don't want to say it was preaching to the choir, but a lot of the first edition was people who were already aware of it and were just kind of pursuing new.
Yeah, they're looking for more information to support their ideas. That's pretty common. Yeah, that's pretty common.
Yeah. So that was basically it. It was only after the 2nd edition came out and went supernova that we started getting all different kinds of lovely email from people. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think what's very interesting is that a lot of that hate mail. I mean, I don't want to say all of it because that's too definitive, and it's not true because there were a couple, but 99% of the hate mail we got was from people who just didn't agree with us and didn't like what we had to say, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But when you compare that to the volume of people who were affected by 9/11 that contacted us, whether they were just there that day walking by the towers and they saw what happened, or they were a 9/11 family member, like the sister of the pilot of Flight 93, she emailed us at one point because at one point we were like, all right, well, we need to take whatever money we are making and we need to give back somehow. We need to show that we're in this for the right reasons. And around that same time, we started getting emails from people who were like, hey, I've heard about your movie. I kind of have my own questions about what happened that day. I lost my brother here or, my father there. And I've heard a lot about your movie, so I was just wondering, most people offered to pay for a copy. We were like, no, we'll just mail you one. Give us your address. Because we had these spindles of DVDs made up that weren't in cases, just, screen printed, professionally pressed, but just, single DVDs ready to hand out at rallies or to mail out to people. So that was a big thing. I mean, you could go to the Internet Archive and go look at old copies of our website, and you'd see a giant banner on the top that says, "We will gladly send free DVD to anyone that was affected by September 11th."
All right, so we got to jump to break here quickly. We'll be back with more of our conversation with Dylan Avery. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johhaw. That's JOHAW. One of the things that is very important to mention, because tonight's topics, both with our current guest, Dylan Avery, who is a documentary filmmaker and has a film called Loose Change 9/11 that talks about conspiracy theories or ideas that have been talked about by a lot of people that the official account of the 9/11 events are not the true account. We like to talk about things that are controversial on this program. We think it's important to hear all sides of every discussion. And we're going to do that not only with this discussion with Dylan, but we're also going to do that with Lee Austin later in the program. And we've got some more topics like that coming up on the show because we think a good debate is healthy, and it also opens eyes and minds and doors sometimes. So, again, we're talking with Dylan Avery. He's a documentary filmmaker. Dylan, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about Loose Change because we don't have you for very long tonight. But I do want to get a sense of...
I thought I was coming on to talk about my CBD documentary.
Yeah,
the 9/11 thing was a bit of a curveball.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to do that to you. It's just I'm so curious about it. But I don't want to belabor it, but I'm just curious as to at what point from what I understand, your documentary was kind of blazing the trail of a lot of these ideas, and a lot of people refer to it when they talk about how they became curious about this particular topic. Did you recognize that you had that kind of powder keg on your hands when you made the film?
When I made the first edition, I mean, it definitely got a lot of positive feedback, and a lot of people had even said, this is, because they were, the documentaries about the topic were, I don't want to say kind of few and far between, but I mean, it was basically Alex Jones and, whoever, a few other people that were making their films. And even when a specific one, In Plain Sight, came out and everyone started raving about that, I was like, oh, well, man, I don't know. Maybe, maybe I got beat to the punch, maybe someone already made the definitive piece on this, but, I'd already already put so much into it. I wasn't about to give up. But I mean, to a much larger extent, when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, and specifically, not even really on a personal scale, but when that film came out and the press started making a big deal about Bush sitting at Booker Elementary and like, oh, well, Michael Moore found this exclusive footage and it shows this and that. And it's like, okay, but the 9/11 movement has had that footage for a couple of years now, and we've been talking about it for years. But now suddenly, because Michael Moore puts it in his documentary, it's like okay to talk about it. I don't want to say it's okay, but it's like, oh, well.
So they take notice all of a sudden, yeah.
Yeah, so all of a sudden they're noticing this thing that we've been talking about for years at that point. So things like that, it definitely caused me to be like, oh, well, I don't know, like, maybe no one's really going to care about this when it comes out. And so, it started getting the pretty positive reactions to the first edition, and that was great. And, even the second edition, when we were finishing it up and we were showing it to a couple of people, they were like, yeah, this is, a lot of the changes you made are really good. Like, this is definitely going to do really well. But I mean, the idea was never for it to really do well and for it to be this giant cultural phenomenon. Like, I literally was just making something because I was sick of trying to explain my thoughts to people. It was hard to try and distill everything that I felt I knew at the time down to a conversation. So it was much easier for me to distill it all down to a film.
Yeah.
And hand it to someone and be like, hey, just, take this home and watch it when you have some spare time. And, and that way, they watch it on their own terms and on their own time. They're not feeling pressured. You're not asking them about it at lunch break at work when they're just trying to relax. It allows them to digest it on their own terms and in their own time. Which I think was kind of helpful because again, I'm not the kind of person that likes to go around like lecturing people or like, oh, well, you should. If it comes up in conversation, I'll talk about it. But I definitely didn't want to be the guy that talks about 9/11, and I hate. I was going to say the conspiracy guy, but I really hate hearing 9/11 associated with conspiracy theories because a lot of the questions that have been asked and a lot of the issues that have been raised by people who were there on that day. The Jersey Girls, the Family Steering Committee. I mean, we wouldn't have even gotten the botched 9/11 commission that we did get if it weren't for the family members speaking out and saying, hey, there's a lot of things about this that don't really add up, and we kind of want you to do something about that. So, I mean, by and large, I think the movement exists because, a lot of the people that were there that day and a lot of the people that lost someone that day have a lot of questions of their own. And I think a lot of them were starting to feel kind of helpless when the commission did form, and it was turning up to be a whitewash. These are people that I've personally spoken to who were like, I didn't really want to believe that there was anything suspicious about 9/11, and I went, I heard the 9/11 commission was coming to town, and I went and I listened to the hearings, and I left even more disappointed than I was when I went there. A lot of people, myself included, were hoping that the 9/11 Commission was going to have answers to some basic questions about that day, and they didn't. The 9/11 Commission's stated purpose was that they were not going to assign blame, that they were not there to get anyone fired, that they weren't there to get anyone in trouble. And I'm sorry, but that's just unacceptable. Like, you had 3,000 people die in broad daylight, and to tell me that no one's going to be held accountable, like you're not going to assign blame, like blame needs to be assigned. Like that's why you're here right now, is to assign blame. So there's just, and that's again part of my issue with having things like 9/11 equated with like the flat Earth, because I think they're entirely different.
Yeah, well, nobody's making that comparison. It's just that they are controversial topics. Whenever we have somebody on this program that talks about either one of those things, we get calls from both sides of the discussion, and we get emails from both sides of the discussion. People get very emotional about it. That's the connection. I want to move on to the talking about your new film, but before I do, if somebody was interested in watching Loose Change, because we've talked about it, where would they go to see it?
It's pretty simple. You can just go to YouTube, and if you look up Loose Change Second Edition HD, I mean, that's the more controversial one. I mean, we had one that was narrated by Daniel Sunjata of FX Has Rescued Me. He was on Netflix for a bit. That one's called Loose Change: An American Coup. which is a little bit more produced. A lot of the information in there, some people would say it's a little bit more solid, just because again, it's not as controversial in nature as the second edition. So if you want to watch like the polished professional edition, you'd watch American Coup with Daniel Sunjata. I wish I could still say that you can go see it on Netflix, but you can't. So it's on Amazon Prime. You can probably find it on YouTube too. And then, if you want to watch the super mega viral edition that was released in 2006 that I, keep talking about, is the one that kind of went supernova. So that's Loose Change Second Edition HD on YouTube. We just recently did a remaster of it, and it's free to watch online. So if anyone would like to do that, you're more than welcome to.
All right,
no
so
one's going to stop.
let's talk about the new film. It's called Magic Molecule. What's this about?
Yes, sir.
What's this about?
So this is a 60-minute documentary about CBD, which is the non-psychoactive cannabinoid. And it's funny, when I was approached to kind of make this film about a year ago, like CBD was just kind of starting to take off. Like people were slowly starting to learn about it, and it was entering the public's consciousness. It was still illegal in a lot of states, even though I guess depending on your metrics, it's not illegal anywhere. But that's one of the problems with the quagmire known as our drug laws in this country, where something can be both legal and illegal at the same time. It's very bizarre. But when I started production of this film, CBD was still kind of unknown to a lot of people, and now like CBD is everywhere. Like, I mean, Walmart's going to start selling it. Carl's Jr. in Denver, they did a CBD infused burger on 420. It's really been kind of crazy to see how fast it's ingrained itself in the culture, and how people are realizing that, A, CBD is not about getting high, because B, CBD and THC are two entirely different things. So, you have two of the main cannabinoids that affect us, from the cannabis family. You have THC, as I said, which is the one that kind of gets you high, and that's the more, I guess you would say, intoxicating compound. Like, if an officer is going to test you for something in your system, he's going to test you for THC. Whereas CBD is the non-psychoactive cannabinoid, but is still responsible for a variety of the healing effects that we associate with medical marijuana. And that's really kind of been the nice thing about this. I mean, not only for me, but I hope for anyone that watches it, is, for a long time, I thought it was just THC. I didn't know that there were so many different cannabinoids that serve many different purposes. I had never heard of CBD up until about a couple of years ago. And I think that's partly due to all the research that we've been able to do, as the laws get a little bit more lax and people are able to do research studies and not have to worry about getting their labs shut down. So basically, there's a wide variety of medical uses for CBD. You have little girls who use it to stop their seizures. I mean, the most famous case is Charlotte Figge, who now has a strain named after her and a hemp oil named after her called Charlotte's Web. Basically, this little girl was suffering nonstop seizures, and I'm very much simplifying the story, but basically, her parents had tried everything, and then she heard from someone or somewhere that hemp oil, the CBD cannabinoid, was very helpful for people who were suffering seizures. And they started giving it to her daughter, and now Charlotte Figge has been seizure-free for a long time. And you not only have that, but you also have Jayla Jerger, who is another 2-year-old girl that is actually featured in the documentary, and her parents went through a very similar thing where they had all these pharmaceuticals being pushed on them. The Child Protective Services not only wanted her to take Keppra, which hadn't even been tested on a girl Jayla's age, so they didn't even know if it was safe for her. They wanted her to take that, every day, and they also wanted to do a biweekly blood draw. So they not only wanted to force this medicine on this girl that hadn't even been tested properly, they wanted her to go get her blood drawn every 2 weeks to prove that she was taking it. And, I mean, we have video of one of these first and only visits that they went for the blood draw, and, I mean, Jayla is just screaming bloody murder the whole time. So, and you compare that and the videos of her, like, shaking and freaking out and pushing the Keppra away, you compare that to the video of her gladly taking Charlotte's Web, like they put the dropper in her mouth and she kind of sucks on it like it's candy. Like, it's crazy compared to how she reacts to the Kepra. So it's, and that's just one example. You have another woman, Margaret.
I just want to ask a couple follow-up questions to what you've already said.
Please.
I'm not particularly well informed when it comes to the debate, at least the details of the debate over medical marijuana and its uses. And I just know that it exists. And I know that a lot of people sing the praises very highly. Are you saying that the CBD is the component that is responsible for those benefits, or is it just one of the components that's responsible for those medical benefits?
CBD is the main component that is responsible for those benefits. Again, like, there's some people that claim that CBD isn't as effective for them as it is when they combine it with THC.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, there's several different cannabinoids, because there's hemp and there's marijuana. Hemp traditionally produces the CBD compound, and marijuana typically produces the THC compound. They're both members of the cannabis family, but they're two entirely different strains of the family. I don't want to say strains, but they're
right.
They're two sides of the same coin, I guess, even though those two sides are vastly different. But yeah, so CBD is the non-psychoactive cannabinoid that can mostly be extracted from hemp plants, and that is, I don't want to say largely, but I don't think I would have been able to make a documentary about little girls using THC to stop their seizures. There's something about CBD and its chemical makeup. Not only that, there's the fact that we are not the only animals that have cannabinoid receptors. All mammals, as far as I know, have cannabinoid receptors. So technically, all animals are born and built with the ability to ingest cannabis in both of its forms, whether it be marijuana or hemp. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
That we have those receptors in our body.
Yeah, it is interesting. Now, does the film Magic Molecule offer, and because you just did, examples of how CBD actually can help from a medical perspective?
Oh yes, all these people I've mentioned are all interviews in the film, and there's several others that I had yet to even mention.
Dylan Avery is our guest. His website is IamDylanAvery.com. He's a documentary filmmaker responsible for films such as Loose Change, 9/11, Black and Blue, and the one we're talking about right now, Magic Molecule. Dylan, in your research for this particular film, we've got about 3 minutes in this segment. In your research for this film, you must have talked about, or at least listened to people talking about, the reasons it's been so difficult to get medical marijuana of any form passed in nationally in all 50 states. What do you see as the major hurdles that are still preventing that?
Well, it's interesting because one of the people that I actually have an interview with in the film is Eric Sterling. He worked in the House of Representatives for several major drug legislations under the Reagan administration, and he ironically is now, and actually was at the time, a marijuana reform activist. But as he so eloquently puts it, lawyers don't always have the luxury of following their heart. So it was only after that he left his work with Congress that he was able to start activism work, pushing for legalization and reform of marijuana laws. There's actually a segment in the film where he does talk about how to solve this situation. And the main conclusion is that rescheduling marijuana is not going to cut it, like scheduling it down to 2 or 3. Like, it has to be completely descheduled. Like, marijuana needs to be regulated, both from a legal and a financial perspective, the same as alcohol. Like, they need to be on the same page, and I think that is the point that we're approaching. It's obviously not happening as fast as people would like, but you have Bill 420 that was introduced this year. You have several states pushing for, if not recreational, then at least medical. And I think that CBD has played a large part in turning that tide, because people are realizing that it is not just about people that want to get high, and that there is a lot about the cannabis plant family that we are still figuring out and still trying to understand. So I think there's hope, and even in my private circles, I've kind of said to people that I see potential full legalization across the board by or in 2020. That's certainly what I'd like to see. I don't know if it'll actually happen, but with the speed at which things are moving, you have a number of states coming back with the amount of tax revenue that they're pulling in from marijuana sales. I think Massachusetts just released their numbers. Millions of dollars in tax revenue going to the states for roads, for schools, for public service programs. I mean, it's a win-win situation. I mean, you're eradicating a black market, you're allowing people safe access to medicine, and you're putting money towards something that's good. I mean, I really don't see what's wrong with that at all. And I think Colorado made the bold first step in doing legalization, and unfortunately, I think it was just once their tax revenue started coming in, I think that was really when a lot of other states looked at it and they were like, "Oh wow, we could be making that much money too."
Right. All right.
So,
listen,
as always, money talks.
We are in the middle of a 2-guest program tonight. Coming up in just a little bit, we've got Lee Austin joining us. Lee is a returning guest to the program. He's the author of a book called Morning Star's Tale. He is also the former talk show host of a program called Outcast Radio. He's going to be talking about some new ideas that he has that supports flat earth theory. And this is a topic that we've talked about rather recently on the show. And we don't like to talk about any single topic too often, but his ideas are new and a bit timely. So we wanted to get him on to be able to share those with you. Right now we're talking with Dylan Avery, and Dylan is a documentary filmmaker. His website is iamdylanavery.com. We've talked about his film Loose Change 9/11, and we are now talking about his new film, Magic Molecule. Dylan, is Magic Molecule out already, or is it still in the process of being released?
It is currently scheduled for a July 23rd release. It's in the hands of Random Media and Orchard as well. I'm hoping that after they do the limited digital release, it'll be available on Netflix shortly after that. Netflix is kind of big on docs, and especially on pot docs. They're like all the rage right now. So it should pop up on Netflix. If it gets its regular digital release in July, then that means August, September, October. Hopefully October, November, it'll be available on Netflix. That's what I'd like to see. Hopefully that's what happens. So yeah, I have to have a call with the distributor in about a week or so to talk about marketing and what their plans are and what I think they should do. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. You know, the I can't say founder, but basically like the chairman, I suppose, of the Indiana chapter of Normal. He's not only in the film, but he's very excited about it. He said that it was his favorite documentary on the subject, and it's not just because he's in it. So that's pretty cool. So I'm kind of hoping that we can maybe, if not partner with Normal in some way, then at least like get a couple shout-outs from the main Normal about the film when it comes out. We'll see. But yeah, it's exciting to get a new film out there.
Yeah, it is.
The Black and Blue, the police documentary I did, that took about 3 years. So this one was done in about 6 months, give or take. So it was nice to have a much quicker turnaround.
Couple quick questions before I let you go. In the process of making this particular film, did you get a perspective or have any discussion with the pharmaceutical industry about any of this?
No, I didn't really try because I figured I would get shut down, and even if I did, like, what would they say? I mean, I do have some commentary on the pharmaceutical situation, and in fact, the representative that I interviewed, Jim Lucas, down in Indiana, he had some things to say about GW Pharma and kind of how it's interesting that once these things start to get accepted by people, that we're also seeing companies announcing that they have cannabis and marijuana-based medicines. So, kind of interesting alignment there.
Yeah.
With, how
what about the medical community as a whole? Do you find it's more sympathetic to the uses of medical marijuana or its derivatives, or do you think it's more still skews toward being opponents of that?
I can't say with 100% certainty. What I can say is that I'm still a member of a large amount, well, a decent amount of CBD Facebook groups. People just kind of sharing their experiences and various attempts to get it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I do see the occasional post from people saying that they mention CBD to their doctor, and their doctor's usually like, "Oh, well, if you start taking that, then I can't prescribe you your regular medicine, and you're probably going to have to find a new doctor in general." Now, granted, this isn't all of them. I'm not painting the medical industry with a broad brush, but there are certainly doctors and medical facilities out there that discourage any sort of use of cannabis or marijuana, even if it's hemp-based CBD, which is perfectly legal in the state. They still say that you're
how is this
penalized.
How is this generally administered? Is it an oil form, and how is it administered if it's an oil form? What are the mechanisms by which people actually use this?
Couple droppers under the tongue.
That's all it is.
Yeah,
just
nice
an oral.
And simple. And I mean, some of it doesn't taste the greatest, so a lot of people either mix it into smoothies. Actually, one of the women I interviewed in Oregon, she actually sent me home with some of her homemade coconut oil, CBD coconut oil, and I was putting that in my coffee every morning. That was delicious. It's real. I mean, you can feel it too. Like I put a spoon of it in my coffee, and like you just feel relaxed. It's weird. Like it's not like a dopey feeling, and it's not like an opioid or anything like that. It just kind of calms you. It's hard to describe unless you've done it, but
no,
I feel like I'm making it sound more intense than it actually is, but it's just kind of this instant calming effect. And a lot of people that say that they have to rely on traditional pharmaceuticals for pain relief no longer have to do so.
Is it addictive that you're aware?
Incredible. What's that?
Is it addictive? Are you aware of that, whether it is or not?
No, not to my knowledge. I mean, not any more addictive than, I almost said any more than the traditional pain medicine.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah, people overdose on opioids every day. So I guess that would maybe be the one thing I could say is that from my understanding, it's definitely not as addictive as the things that people are replacing with CBD. I guess that might sound like a cop-out, but I mean, it's not. It has no psychoactive properties, so I mean, even if one were to try to overdose on CBD, you would basically just fall asleep and just take a long nap. I mean, people say that about marijuana too, but I mean, it's definitely the case with CBD. Like, there's really no way to overdose on it. One of the people I interviewed, Heather, who's the founder of Realm of Caring, which is actually an offshoot of Charlotte and Paige Feige. But she actually describes CBD as the Boy Scout molecule, and that it kind of goes into your body and finds things that are wrong and does what it can to fix it. So it's very interesting. And again, there's still a lot of things we're learning. There's still a lot of things that we don't quite understand. But I think that with the changing of laws and the relaxing of federal scheduling and being allowed to conduct clinical trials, I think that we're going to see more legitimate research into. And, more studies to basically prove what a lot of people have been saying for a long time.
Dylan, we're out of time. I appreciate you joining us tonight. I know that you said that this particular film is going to be released in July. I imagine as a filmmaker that you're probably already looking ahead to your next project. If that's so, what is it? And if not, what are some ideas that you might have that you may want to look at in the future?
I don't have anything particularly planned. There's a couple things I'd like to do. Really, the main thing I'd like to do is direct an actual feature film, which is the main thing I've always wanted to do. I'm kind of working on a couple things in that avenue, but that's basically it. I actually don't really have anything planned at the moment. I'm kind of waiting to see what pops up while I try to make some moves on my own.
Right. Well, great. Well, again, thanks for being here. We appreciate your time and your expertise on all this.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so again, the website for Dylan is I am Dylan, spelled with a Y, Dylan, Avery.com. You can see a bunch of references to his work there. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll bring our second guest of the evening in. Lee Austin will be talking about an article that he's written recently that talks about the sun and the moon and new theories about that, at least theories that he's presented. He's a freelance writer, former talk show host, and his website is morningstarstale.com. I do want to remind you what we've got coming up the next few nights. Tomorrow night, we have Lee Harris joining us. Lee is an energy healer. He'll be giving practical guidance, inspiration, and a clear blueprint for growth and change, including how to invoke the help of our spirit guides and angels. Tuesday night, John Hogue, who is a prophet and a Nostradamus scholar and expert, will be on the program to talk about Nostradamus' predictions and his work and how it is relevant today. So we have a lot of things coming up. Great stuff. Again, we've had Lee Austin on the program. Lee, welcome back to Beyond Reality Radio. It's great to have you here again.
Thank you, JV. Great to be on board once again.
Yeah, so by the way, the phone lines are open at 844-687-7669. Tonight we're going to be talking about an article that you have written recently. I won't even introduce it. I'm going to let you do that. What's this article about?
Well, let me just say that the book itself, Morningstar's Tale, all of it is now on the website. I've decided to give it away.
Oh,
so
wow.
If you want to go to morningstarstale.com, it's free. You don't even have to buy it. The article itself, and I contributed this to a news website called Before It's News. It's called Sun and Moon Same Size, Half-Lit Moon Disproves Reflection During the Day. And what I was talking about, JV, in the article is that during the daytime, there are times when the moon and the sun are in the sky at the same time, and yet the moon is not fully illuminated. There's times when it may be waxing or waning, but it's very rare when you see the sun and the moon in the daytime sky at the same time. And that, to me, proves that the moon is generating its own unique light, and it's a cold light. And in fact, according to the Book of Enoch, the sun pours its sunlight into the moon, and the moon actually projects its own unique cold light. And it was something I never even really paid attention to until after I wrote the book. It was a couple months ago. I was just staring at the daytime sky, and I thought to myself, the signs are in the sky that prove the Earth is flat. Why do we keep trying to prove the Earth is flat when we can just prove the heliocentric theory?
Did I hear this correctly? Did you say the Book of Enoch talks about the moon generating its own light?
Correct. In the Book of Enoch, it talks about the fact that the moon receives its sunlight from the sun. So over a 14-day period, the sun will fill the moon with its light. It becomes a full moon, and then over the next 14 days, as it's waning, it extinguishes itself. And when I read that the first time, I thought it was insane, but the more I've gone down the rabbit hole, for example, NASA says the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun and is 400 times away from the sun in distance, and that's the reason why the moon and the sun appear to be the same size. Yet in the Book of Enoch, it states that the sun and the moon are the same size and that the sun pours its light into the moon over a 14-day period, and the moon actually projects its own light. And when you see the moon and the sun in the daytime sky at the same time during the daytime, and the moon is not fully illuminated, I can't understand the heliocentric theory that says it's actually a reflection, because what it's showing to me is that the moon is actually projecting its own unique cold type of light, and yet the moon and the sun are the same size, according to the Book of Enoch, which is what I believe.
Well, we all know that in a solar eclipse, that the moon completely shadows the sun perfectly, and there's the illusion or the appearance or the reality that they're the same size. We all know that we've all been able to observe that, if not directly, in some fashion or another. And what you're saying here is that they are actually the same size.
Yes, they are the same size. And when it comes to eclipses, that is one topic that disproves the flat Earth. But there's another belief I've developed in the last 6 months that, in fact, that is not the Earth's shadow, but it is, in fact, going through a magnetic field that is generating from the center of the flat Earth. I'm becoming a proponent now of not just the flat Earth, but also the hollow Earth. And as we dialogue, you'll get the impression that I don't have all of my ducks in a row, and I don't, because this is continual research. Yeah. And as I go further down, I'm learning that I really don't know anything about the flat Earth. I'm beginning to believe not only is it flat, but it's actually hollow, and that there's a whole other conspiracy, if you will, at the North Pole. I believe there's a vortex there, and that leads to center Earth, and I'm becoming a proponent of the hollow Earth, and from the hollow Earth transmits the black sun, and the black sun is responsible for the northern lights, and perhaps, maybe, just perhaps, the magnetic field comes into play during the eclipse, and it's not really the shadow of the Earth we see on the moon, but in fact, perhaps it is the sunlight transposing itself through the magnetic field, which is generated from the black sun in the middle of the Earth. And I know what I just said sounds insane, but this entire topic is insane.
Yeah, and we have about a minute here before we have to take a break, but someone in our chat room made a comment saying, I don't know of any planets that are flat. Now, what we're talking about here is we're throwing this whole model that we've all grown up being told is the truth, that we have a bunch of planets, they're all spherical, and they're all orbiting the sun. I mean, that whole thing has to be thrown out to understand what you're talking about here, right?
Absolutely. And in the Book of Enoch, he talks about the fact that there are no planets, there are no stars, there are, in fact, what are called luminaries, and they're the result of light bursts. And we can get into what Tesla talked about, the electric universe, as opposed to the gravitational theory of Einstein. And if you want, we can get into that in the next segment, because the illusion of planets and the illusion of stars is center to the foundation of the flat Earth theory.
I am JV. Thanks for being here with me tonight. The phone lines are open at 844-687-7669. Our guest this hour is Lee Austin, author of the book Morning Star's Tale. His website is morningstarstale.com. And Lee, did you say that if you go to the website, you can download the whole book for free?
Yeah, over the weekend, what I did was I uploaded the entire book. And the reason I did that, I wrote the book because I believe that what was written, for the most part, is the truth. And the book itself was written by Lucifer. He's the narrator. Of course, I wrote the book. But I thought there's been so much discussion and misinformation about flat Earth. And when you talk about it, it's hard to conceptualize what the flat Earth is. So I thought, I'm going to write it down concisely in 80 pages, and I'm going to have Lucifer narrate it, because the father of lies decides to tell the truth. And I thought this subject is so upside down, why not have creation's greatest liar get off his platform and actually tell the truth? So in between the bravado, Lucifer tells the truth about how the universe is set up.
Let's talk a little bit more about this article you wrote and the idea of that the moon and the sun are the same size. You've talked about how the moon actually has its own light, its own white light. And I think one of the things you mentioned is that one of the things that supports that idea is that if you take the Earth's temperature in a moon shadow versus moon light source, explain this, because it's colder in the light. Is that what you determined?
Yeah, correct. In the Book of Enoch, it talks about there's two lights. One is the daylight, the sun, and the other is the night light, which is the moon. And because the sun transfers or pours in its light into the moon over a 14-day period, the sun loses 1/7 of its light over that period. But the moon absorbs, if you will, that sunlight and then projects it out. But it projects out a unique, colder light. And you're right. If you go out during a full moon in the nighttime and you have a thermometer, temperature gauge, and you put it in direct moonlight, it will be colder than when you move the gauge into the shadow of the dark. So indeed, the moon does project its own kind of cold light. And the one hindrance I've had on this particular theory, and I don't believe it to be a theory, I believe it to be the truth, is looking at the moon, it's hard to believe that it's a light. But this is how I think of it, as a pitted light bulb. When you think of the moon as a light bulb with pits in it, craters, then it's easier to understand, because in the article I say the moon is a hollow, flat, translucent, crystalline, self-illuminating disk, one that generates its own type of unique cold light. And during the full moon circle, the luminaries, which we can get into in a moment, the stars and the planets, can actually be seen shining through the moon's disk, confirming its translucent composition. So not only does the moon project its own type of light, but you can actually see the stars and the planets during different periods of time shining through the moon, which also adds more evidence to the fact that this is not what we think it is. And the reason I don't believe man never landed on the moon is not because you can't get there, because the moon is on the other side of the dome. In other words, it's only, according to the book, about 3,500 miles away. We can get to the moon. The problem is we can't land on the moon because the moon is not terra firma. It is not land. It is, I don't know exactly what it is, but we can't land on it because it's a translucent, crystalline surface. And I don't know what that means or where I got that information, but that's what I believe it to be.
All right, so I'm not familiar with this phenomenon that some other celestial bodies, to use what would be the common term, can be seen through the moon. Is this something that there's photographic evidence of, or where did this come from? I haven't heard this before.
Well, actually, there is a YouTube video. If you go to Crow 777, I believe his website was the one and YouTube channel that actually first showed it. He got a high-powered telescope and zoomed in on the moon, and he could see, and he shows you the stars. And to get to that next point, we were talking about the fiction of planets. Did you want to delve into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, this is from the book Morning Star's Tale. And again, it's narrated by Lucifer, so he's a little arrogant. Here's what he says about the planets. Another deception is the fiction of planets. Millions of spinning balls rotating around millions of burning star balls. Actually, the planets and stars are a collective habitation of angelic beings known as luminaries and stones of fire, flickering, sentient, intelligent orbs contained within the sea firmament dome. If you want to see extraterrestrial beings, look up into the night sky. The function of these interdimensional luminaries are to glorify my name. He would tell you otherwise, just one of our many disagreements. I was the first stone of fire to be cast down from the fifth dimension of the third heaven. And by the way, as a side note, Lucifer talks about the fact that there are, in fact, 10 dimensions or 10 heavens. And actually, that does line up with string theory. I believe string theory is not a theory. It is actually reality, that we are all the result of vibrations. And the same is true with the planets and the stars. They are the results of flickering lights. And the luminaries, if you look through a telescope, JV, you'll see flickering lights. The stars, the planets, they all seem to be flickering because what they're doing is they're radiating their light through the sea firmament dome. And it's the sea firmament that is actually causing that ripple effect. And that's why you don't see it with the sun and the moon, because they are below the sea firmament dome. And again, the reason man hasn't landed on the moon is that the moon itself, you cannot land on it because it's not terra firma. I know it's a lot, but we have a short period of time.
Yeah. I want to get into tides, too, because one of the things that you reference is the tidal activity and how that is also curious in this whole discussion.
Absolutely. And again, this ties into the hollow earth theory, of which I'm becoming a believer. I'm not there yet. It was like flat earth. It took me about a year and a half. But the idea with the tides is that the flat earth resides on this bosom, and it flotates. And I know that probably is not the correct phrasing, but it's late night. But essentially the way the tides work is you have this vortex where the North Pole is. And apparently the way it works is that the earth, even though it's flat, will go back and forth, and it's all structured. It's all organized like the sun, the days and the hours of the moon, and the sunset, all of that. I believe the great architect controls all of it. But because of the floating bosom of the Earth and this vortex at the North Pole, apparently the water goes in and out depending on whether it's a high tide or a low tide. And when people say, that's insane, I get it, but explain this to me. Why is it that there is no low tide and high tide in the Great Lakes region, the greatest body of fresh water on the planet? And the reason is because the Great Lakes are not directly connected to the ocean. I know you have the St. Lawrence, Canal, the Seaway, but that is not a wide connection. So because of the Great Lakes not being connected to the oceans, they're not affected by the tide, which means the moon is not controlling the oceans and the tides. It's actually this vortex at the North Pole that man is not allowed to traverse, just like he's not allowed to go to the South Pole.
As you put all this together and you start looking at these ideas, some people would say to you, how can we prove or disprove that there's a dome involved here? How can we prove or disprove any of this? And there's a lot of other evidence that comes to play when people say, if I stand at a certain point on the Earth, I can see the curvature over distances. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that has to be overcome to accept some of the things you're talking about.
You're talking about indoctrination. You remember, JV, the first time you went to school, one of the first things you saw was a globe. And we have been told from day one that the Earth is round, and it certainly looks like it is. But is it? When you see the sun moving in the sky, we're told that the Earth is rotating. But is it? The more I try to prove the flat Earth, the more I just want to talk about the heliocentric theory. The idea that we're moving at 1,000 miles an hour right now, even though you're in New York and I'm down in Florida, we're both moving at 1,000 miles an hour. And at the same time, we're moving at 66,000 miles per hour around the sun. And at the same time, the Milky Way is expanding at about 2 million miles per hour. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, yet 400 times away from the sun. I just don't have that kind of faith to believe in the heliocentric theory, which pulls me towards the geocentric theory. And it took me over a year to come to these beliefs, and I don't expect to convince anyone tonight. The only reason I wrote the book was to get people to think for themselves and stop relying on the spoon-fed reality, the lies we've been fed our whole life. I do believe we live on a flat Earth. And I do believe if you try to disprove it, you'll become a believer, because that's exactly what I did. And if you don't think this theory is insane, you're not sane, because everyone who has ever investigated the flat Earth has from the outset said, this is insane, and I'm going to disprove it. And that's my challenge to the listener tonight. Disprove it. Find out for yourself. For God's sake, don't believe me. Do your own homework.
That's a really important point. I know, and I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Mark Sargent. He was on the program not long ago. And when I asked him that question, how did you come to these views? He said, he set out to disprove this idea. And the more he looked at it, the more convinced that there was no disproving it because it was the reality. That seems to be the common thread through a lot of folks, at least that we've had on this program talking about this.
What really proves it for me, JV, is just getting quiet and going to a quiet place outside. During the daytime, I see the sun moving in the sky because I believe the sun is moving in the sky. In the nighttime, I see the moon moving in the sky because I believe the moon is moving in the sky. And when I step outside and I don't feel any movement, I don't believe we're moving. And when I see the stars rotate around Polaris, the North Pole, that also says to me we're not moving. There's so many things that say we're not moving as opposed to we are moving, that if I'm just willing to put my disbelief on hold for a little while and open myself up to other ideas, maybe we've all been lied to. And this gets into the hollow earth. I'm not a believer in the hollow earth, but I'm going to pursue it like I did the flat earth. Maybe it is true. And if it is, it adds another layer of insanity and perhaps another layer of lies that we've been told our entire life about where we live. And for me, JV, the hardest thing to believe is the sea firmament dome, that in fact there is an ocean, a greater sea, as Enoch said in the book of Enoch, above us in the fourth dimension. We live in the first heaven of the third dimension, and above that sea firmament dome is the fourth dimension of the second heaven, and that's where the luminaries, the stars, and the planets are. And then you have the third heaven, and then there's 7 more heavens. So by reading the book of Enoch and some of the other extra-biblical texts that have been thrown out and called heresy, I've actually grown to believe in God more than I did before I started this investigation, because everything points to intelligent design. It has to be intelligent design, and I think that's what they're hiding. Ultimately,
that was going to be
the fact that there's a great architect who built this place, and we can't explain it.
Yeah, Lee, that was my next question, because it's one that everybody asks. Why the deception? Why is it so important for, whether it's a scientific community, whether it's governments, whomever it is that's leading this deception, to do so? It would take a lot of people and a lot of planning and a lot of work to create this deception. Why do it?
Kissinger said, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Neo in the Matrix asked the Oracle, what do they want? And she said, what do all men want? Power, control. If it was revealed that the earth was flat and that we lived under a sea firmament dome, atheists would have to say, obviously, if there's intelligent design,
right,
who built this place? And all of a sudden, those people that run the world no longer have the control they had.
We're going to run out of time here. I have to ask this question, because if the atheists are afraid of the truth, this version of the truth, and they are afraid of admitting there is an intelligent design, therefore a creator, it seems to me if they were trying to hide that, and they would be paying the ultimate price, because all those things we were told about a God and the afterlife would be denied to them. So it seems like they'd want to jump on board and not hide that. It's kind of a weird paradox.
It is, and the greatest paradox is the relationship between Christians and astrophysicists. I'm a Christian, but most Christians don't believe in the flat Earth theory, and it's interesting to me that a Christian will say, well, of course man didn't evolve from an ape. That's evolution, and that's blasphemy. But by the same token, they'll go, of course I believe in the heliocentric theory, that we revolve around a burning ball, because the evolutionists told us so. Well, are you going to believe some of what they say, all of what they say, none of what they say? It's interesting. The greatest bedfellows are Christians and astrophysicists.
This is a topic that's not going to be resolved anytime soon. Lee, again, thank you for joining us with another perspective on this. Your website is morningstarstale.com. Where else would you like to send folks to find out more about your work?
Well, they can purchase the book at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. But again, if you just go to morningstarstale.com, I've uploaded the book because I made the decision. I just want people to read it, pass it on, and figure it out for yourself. There's no hidden agenda. I'm giving the book away at this point because I want people to begin their own journey for truth.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us again, Lee. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, JV. Have a great night.
Always interesting to see how blood gets boiling when we talk about topics like flat Earth or even 9/11 conspiracies. And again, I just say that we like to present all sides. We hear all arguments. We let people offer their evidence, their ideas, and everybody can go away and make up their own minds. That's what it's about. But we certainly don't need to be disrespectful to anyone. That doesn't prove anything, and it certainly doesn't help our relationships with our fellow man. So thanks for being here. I didn't mean to be jump on a soapbox here, but I felt it was necessary to at least say that. We've got a great program tomorrow night. We're going to be talking with Lee. Who is it? Lee Harris. He's an energy healer. I knew it was Lee. We had a bunch of Lees, Orion, didn't we? Lee Harris is an energy healer. He's going to be giving practical guidance, inspiration, and a clear blueprint for growth and change, including how to invoke the help of our spirit guides and angels. So that'll be a great program on tomorrow night's show. That's going to do it for tonight. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by JV Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.